Hello, and welcome to another episode of It's a History podcast. I am your host, Madison, and today we are joined by Kit Sargent about her most recent release, The Doctor of Auschwitz. With 9 historical fiction novels to her name, including The Doctor of Auschwitz, and riveting tales of real-life spies like Marie Madeleine Fourcade and Nancy Wake, Kit Sargent weaves narratives that bring history to life through the lens of women who defied the odds. In addition to her historical fiction, Kit has also penned 2 novels in contemporary women's fiction, one of which, What It Is, was a previous Kindle Scout winner. A teacher by profession and at heart, Kit loves to impart little-known facts and dares you to walk away from one of her books without learning at least one new thing. The Doctor of Auschwitz follows Adelaide Hautville, a psychiatrist who was arrested for defending a Jewish family and spent nearly 3 years in concentration camps during World War II. The Doctor of Auschwitz is a historical fiction where Kit takes the real-life events of Adelaide and brings them to the reader in narrative form. So with that, let's get right into it. Welcome to another episode of It's a History podcast. I'm here with Kit Sargent to talk about her most recent release, The Doctor of Auschwitz. Kit, if you want to introduce yourself a little bit.
Hello, everyone. I'm Kit, and I'm happy to be here today.
Awesome. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about Kit's new book, a little bit about her writing process, and how she picks the women that she wants to write about today. So we will just get right into maybe a little bit about your writing process. How do you go about creating these books and bringing these women to the forefront?
Yeah, so I've written 9 historical fiction novels, and they're all about real life women. So sometimes in history, we know the what happened, but not always the how or why. So that's when I use my fiction license to sort of fill in the gaps. And I actually published 2 contemporary women's fiction novels before I moved to historical fiction. So the first novel, when I decided to switch over, I just typed in smart women that you've never heard of into Google. And the first thing that popped up was 355. And I was like, I don't know who 355 is. Who's that? And it turned out she was a woman spy in the Revolutionary War. So I'm thinking the wheel starts spinning. I could write about women spies in the Revolutionary War. I could move to Civil War, World War I, World War II. And that's exactly what I did.
So for this book, where did you first encounter Adelaide?
Yeah, I fall down a lot of rabbit holes, is what I like to say. So I do a lot of research, and sometimes I just start clicking and oh, that's really cool. Click here, click here. So I was researching Nancy Wake, which was the novel that I published right before Adelaide. And I was looking up, I think I was looking up somebody that was in her network, and the woman ended up in the convoy of 31,000. And I was like, ooh, what's the convoy of 31,000? And it was a lot of women that were sent to Auschwitz together in a giant convoy. And so I just started researching the women in there, and then Adelaide's story popped out, and I was like, oh my gosh, I have to write about her. So I've written all my other books about spies, and I was like, I have to write about this woman. She wasn't technically a spy, but just her story spoke to me. And so I already was planning on writing Virginia Hall, which I'm working on now, but I took a pause on Virginia Hall because I just needed to write Adelaide's story.
I really enjoyed reading through her story because she was in the concentration camps for a really long time. It was
I know.
Years, over 3 years she was in there.
Yeah.
And because the way you have the book set up with the with the month and the year of when things are taking place, it really kind of put in perspective just how long she was there. And then, juxtaposed with the trial that's also happening in the book, just seeing a little bit of in the moment, making decisions that maybe you wouldn't normally make in your everyday life, and then seeing the consequences of something like that happening. So do you want to we're kind of talking about her a little bit already. You want to talk a little bit about Adelaide and just her story and who she is?
Yeah, so she was technically a psychiatrist, and she was at a train station, and she lost her suitcase. So she was in the demarcation line, and she needed a special pass, and she forgot it because she was more concerned about her suitcase. So she was withheld in the train station, and she saw a Jewish family getting, sort of bullied by the guards, and she spoke out, and they arrested her for speaking out. And then they basically said all along this journey, just apologize, we'll let you go. And she was like, what am I going to apologize for? Sticking up for what I'm never going to apologize for that. So she ended up in a lot of prisons, and then eventually she was sent to Auschwitz. And because she was a doctor, they wanted her to perform some pretty awful sterilization procedures. And she said no. She got into it a little bit, and after a while, she just refused to do it anymore. And she knew she could get killed by saying no. But luckily, she met some of the right people that could help her and protect her. And then she survives. So years later, she's a key witness in a trial of another prisoner doctor who didn't say no. And it seemed like he wasn't just obeying orders, he was sort of doing it gladly. So, yeah, that was the 1964 Uris v. Daring trial, which apparently was a very, very famous trial.
Is what I was when I was reading through it, because you have it where like it's like some of Adelaide's story like in the past and then some of the trial, and it goes back and forth throughout the story. So as you're going through the beginning of Adelaide's story and then you start going to the trial and it's talking about the sterilization experiments that were happening, and we haven't quite gotten there yet like in Adelaide's story, so you know it's kind of building to something like that, so you're like, just when is this happening? And it takes a long time from her to from the start of when she's in prison to when that actually happens in her timeline. And I was it to say no to something like that when you're under that kind of duress almost is a very bold and, you know, confident thing to do, to feel that you can be able to go against it and care for other people, even if it means that your life might be in danger, like standing up for someone who needs to be stood up for in the just in the time with the Nazis and their, you know, the wanting to exterminate all of the Jewish people, all of them.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
Was there anything about Adelaide that surprised you when you were reading through her life or looking into her?
I just, yeah, probably just how brave she was. And a lot of times when I write things like this, people will be like, "Oh, what would you do in that situation?" I'm like, I don't know what I would do in that situation. Thankfully, well, I'll never be in that situation, but everything that she stood for was just shocking to me in that time and place. And the amount, and like every time, just say you're sorry. Like, you don't have to go on to a concentration camp. She's like, I'm never gonna say that. So.
I towards the end of the book, you had written a line, something along the lines of I'm a cat who's already used 8 of its 9 lives. I don't think I can make any really more of these decisions. I'm starting to get to the end of the rope here. Because she there were multiple instances where she made a decision that in even just a slightly different circumstance would have meant that that was it. Like that would have been the end. But she did find herself in not the right place in the right time, but in maybe an okay place at a not so great time, for her to just keep going through. For when you write these stories, where do you like decide where to start their stories and where to end them? Like, how do you go about what exact part are you going to go into? Because with this one, you start like right when she starts, like when she first gets arrested, like that's where the story starts. How do you decide where to start someone's story?
Yeah, it's kind of hard. I would like to tell all the stories like from beginning to end. My first one I did, there's a few reviews that said it started a little slow, and I was like, okay, so like maybe jumping into the action and less background, and then you kind of like put the background in there later because we want to know where she came from. Like her family was really big to her siblings and everything like that. And the fact that her mom had died was a big part of it too, because that's why she forgot her past. So yeah, I think nowadays I started try to go right into the action and then just kind of filter in the little bits that you need to know as we move forward. With Virginia Hall, the story I'm working on now, she she's famous because she was called the limping lady. She lost her leg in a hunting accident. And so I was like, yep, we need to make sure we show that one before we jump right into the spying.
Awesome. So you have like a, I guess a maybe a love for the women spies and how they you know, how they operated. Do you want to talk a little bit about maybe some of the other women that you've written about?
Sure. Most of the books I've written about are women from the Special Operations Executive. So if you're familiar with the movie Ungentlemanly Warfare, that was about the SOE men. So there were women that were part of the SOE too, especially in France, because in France they enacted a mandatory work service for men. So they were being sent to Germany to work for the war effort. So you couldn't be an able bodied man walking around the streets of Paris that easily. So they realized women could go in, and the Germans really didn't suspect women. So there were about 40 women that were sent into occupied France to spy and work for the resistance. A lot of them worked for the Maquis, which was just, I equate them to like robbers Hood's berrymen. They lived in the mountains of France, escaping the mandatory work service. And so Nancy Wake was living with them for a while, and she would complain a lot of how they hadn't seen women in 2 years. They hadn't seen a toothbrush in 2 years either. So a lot of the women I write about worked for the Special Operations Executive. Marie Madeline was probably the only one. She ended up working for MI6. So she was on the ground in France already, but they got a lot of their funding through England, and England got a lot of information back because they didn't really know what was happening in France. And so they had a network of spies that would provide them with information on Hitler's next moves.
Awesome. That's so cool because I've read a lot about women's history, and I listen to a lot of other podcasts about women's history, and it's always still surprising to hear about all these women that did so many things, but you never hear about them until you look for them on your own. And it's nice to have people like you that write about them, that make them into more, real people that like you can read about and relate to. When it comes to writing your books, they are historical fiction. How do you go about filling in the gaps, maybe? Like the actual like historical facts, and then filling in like maybe conversations that happened, like words that we don't know exactly what happened, but like a general, this probably happened.
Yeah, I use a lot of biographies, autobiographies, firsthand sources as much as I can. Some of the women, their files are available online. Some of them aren't. They're all in England, which I can't normally go there and do my research. But a lot of the people that I've seen them have written, there's a lot of books on some of them. Some of them are a little more scarce. And then, persuading them. It's pretty well documented. Like there's a whole process for getting into the SOE they would go to an interview in a random hotel room, which apparently had this amazing marble bathroom, and then the interview process. And I kind of was making up so we know what they would tell them and how much. And sometimes I give a little too much information away just so for the novel's sake, because a lot of it was top secret. And if you didn't make it through the interview, they didn't want you to know too much about, secret operations and things like that. And then, yeah, like I'll take an information so we know they were recruited here, they had this conversation here, and that's where I can sort of use my fiction license to be a little bit more creative to decide what would happen. There's been a few times where, characters do things that you weren't expecting them to do. I won't give much away, but there was a romance that happened between two of my characters, and I was like, nope, this can't happen. They didn't end up together. So we got to nip this one in the bud.
Awesome. I do enjoy a good, historical fiction. Reading them. I like World War II historical fictions. I've read a couple of other books about, I guess I like this genre, like the women doctors in like Auschwitz, and I've read a couple of books that are surrounding women who are doctors in Auschwitz, and I have like a small little special interest in that. One of my very first episodes I had done for this podcast was the dressmakers of Auschwitz, women who were seamstresses, and they were recruited to make dresses for the women of like the higher level of the SS. And just reading through your book and about like the Canada, where like they had all the stolen goods that they kept. That was a place where like the seamstresses, they would go and get the cloth that they would make these dresses for, like Hedwig Haas. She was one of the main women who was getting dresses from these women, and just seeing how they use skills from their life before being arrested to, survive throughout this terrible, terrible endeavor.
Yeah, I was really surprised that there was like a hierarchy happening. And so the longer you were there, the more power you had. And then, the Nazis kind of pitted people against each other, and they made it so the capos turned so evil, and they, Orly Wald was a big one. And I've read a couple of books about Orly, and a lot of them, it's double-sided. There were some people that said she was really awful and really cruel, and there's others where she was saving all these lives. So I try to like weave that into it.
Yeah, it's hard to put yourself in a place where you've never experienced anything like that, so you don't know how you're going to react when something like that happens. Because I mean, she had like a really low number. It was like only 3 digits. So she had been there for a long, long time, and over those years she learned what she needed to do to save herself, even if it was at the cost of someone else's life. And it's just a matter of self-preservation from being there for at the end, she would have been there for almost 10 years. It was
Yeah,
the
I think.
1936, I think, was when she was arrested. And it was like, that's a long time to be imprisoned and having to make decisions. But then you have people like his last name is escaping me. The main doctor, starts with a D.
Daring.
Yes, thank you. I was going to say
Yeah.
Denning. I was like, that's not right. Dr. Daring, like, he was also a prisoner, but he was making decisions that went a little bit further than just saving himself. He seemed to be getting a little bit more into the Nazi ideology than he probably should have been.
Yeah, I think that power definitely went to his head and the privileges that he had. And they seem to be always be suspicious of people that had, more privileges than other people because they were probably collaborationists with the Nazis.
Yeah, there's a point where you write that he's like it looks like he's appeared to have like gained weight even. Well, like
Hmm.
like we know that the prisoners were eating almost nothing. They were given barely anything to not even really anything to drink, just like bread and a little bit of broth. And he had managed to gain weight in this time. So it makes you really think what else was he doing that
Yeah,
that maybe
exactly.
you don't even that we don't even know about because the Nazis burned a lot of the evidence of what happened.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And like stealing that the whole bread stealing it seems a little petty, but that's your livelihood. And if people are stealing it, then you are pretty much, going to starve if someone takes the one piece of bread you get that day.
Yeah, the because in the book you allude to her being part of the not allude to, she's like a part of the resistance, but maybe not in an official capacity, kind of more like a passing member of the resistance. But she does, she saves a couple of papers, she puts them in her dress pocket to save because at the end when their camp had been liberated by the Soviets and they found those papers in the crematorium that were being burned. So any paper that they had saved would have been almost that would have been it for evidence for what the Nazis had done.
Yeah, I think they knew, like, if you told people what was happening, like, who would believe that this was really happening here other than like stories? And even now today, sometimes people don't always believe it, but yeah,
Because
they had to collect whatever evidence they could.
I mean, it was the 1940s. It's a very barbaric thing to be happening in a modern country in the 20th century. Like we had TVs, we had radios, we had cars, and they're performing mass exterminations on Jewish people. Like that's and others, but that's a very barbaric thing to be happening in what is modern times. So it does sound unbelievable until you really hear the stories of the people who went through it. Like that's just to do something like that when we were so advanced as a society is it's just a little mind-boggling that this is something that did actually happen.
Yeah, and a lot of the survivors are passing on, and so the next generations, like my kids coming in, like we got to make sure they understand this so it doesn't happen again.
Yes, I remember even in middle school watching, we had the English teacher, we were reading The Boy in the Striped Pajamas, and she wheeled in the TV, put in a VHS tape of interviews that they had done with Holocaust survivors. And they were all people who were older, like they were like in their 70s, their 80s, like they were people
Yeah.
that were telling their stories just like on camera, like for record, just before they passed. Like they needed to make sure that it was something that would last through the generations.
Yeah, definitely. That was a piece of my motivation for sure.
Yeah, especially with everything that's going on in the world.
Yeah,
Yeah. So
agreed.
it's good to keep these stories in I don't know in the cultural zeitgeist because we move so quickly from story to story now. It's not something that we don't stay on a topic for very long. It's very fleeting when we have something happen. So we have to just keep bringing it up and keep reminding people like this is something that happened. This is something that we need to still acknowledge that happened. It wasn't that long ago. It was in the 40s. It was something that my grandparents were alive when that happened. They were children, but they were still around. Like it's not that far removed from where we are today.
Exactly. Yep.
Is there anything else you want to talk about? while we're here?
Well, the audiobook should be coming out soon.
Ooh,
So,
that's so exciting. I got really into audiobooks this year. I've listened to like 40 of them. I have a rather long commute, so it is something
um,
that keeps me entertained. So that's super exciting. And you have it available on Kindle Unlimited, which is also awesome. That's how I read it.
yeah. Yeah, and Alice Sackett is my narrator, and she does an amazing job. So and I was, you know, nervous about who would be able to do it with the whole court scenes and moving back and forth. And there's not a lot of dialogue tags, and then you have to have the scary SS guards, and she did a fabulous job. So I'm very excited about it.
That's so exciting. I'll have to be looking for that when it comes out. Are your other books on audio?
I have a couple of them. I have 355, my Revolutionary War book. I went through a publishing service for that one, and then Spark of Resistance. But I'm hoping this one will take off, and then I can go backwards. So I was hoping to get Nancy Wake on audio because the sequel in that one is Virginia Hall, and that should be coming out in the summer of 2026. So I'm going to kind of work backwards with my newer published ones with the audio.
Awesome. That's so exciting. I really enjoyed your writing style too, so I will definitely be visiting your past releases as well as I keep going, and I'll be sure to really check out for those audiobooks. And if you even want to email me, let me know when they're out. I can definitely make a post or something about them.
Oh yeah, yeah. ACX, which is Amazon's like Audible people, they're reviewing it. So
Oh,
as soon as
okay.
they approve it, which they said it takes like 10 days, and it's been 5 days. So hopefully it'll come out like in the next week or so. Hopefully, definitely before the holidays.
Yes, that's awesome. All right. Well, I've really enjoyed this conversation and I really enjoyed reading about Adelaide. So I'm excited to see your next releases, excited to visit your previous ones.
Thank you so much for the opportunity.
All right, yes, thank you for coming on. I'm so glad that I was able to have you on. And so this book is available on Amazon, Kindle Unlimited, soon to be audiobook. And I will make sure to link it in the description below. Thank you again for coming on.
All right, thank you.
Thank you again to Kit for coming on the show and sharing this wonderful book with us. I will have a link to the book and Kit's website below in the description. If you liked what you heard today, please leave a review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. If you have any questions, comments, or topic ideas, you can email me at itsahistorypodcast@gmail.com. You can also find me on Instagram and Threads. I'm pretty active on both. Thank you again for listening to this week's episode, and I hope to have you in the next one.